Welcome to the first episode of Dawn of Ethos. Today, joining me, Manuel Corchia from Switzerland. And for the audience that we have here, for the global audience, I think a short introduction to your person would be necessary. Please, Manuel.
Yes. Thank you very much. I hope my English will fit for this interview. Yeah, I have more interviews in the regarding days in English, but still sometimes it's a little bit, how should I say it, German English, right? So, who am I? I'm 25 years old. I'm a father of one son. I studied scientific graphic design, scientific illustration at the art school here in Zurich. I'm an activist and a right-wing activist, or to be precise, an identitarian activist, and the leader of the identitarian activist group, Junge Tat. I hope I forgot nothing important.
I think these are the most important information that I also gathered on the internet. But let us rather dive into some information that are maybe not on the internet. Let's start with your life. I mean, usually what I'm interested in is in the person's life that I'm interviewing, and also which events or which corners in your life led to who you are today and what you think today. Maybe let's start with where you were born, in Switzerland, and in which city.
Yeah, that's. I was born in the quarter four of Zurich. Actually, I think in a, I don't know how to call it in English. Here it starts with the English barrier, but it's like a house where you can birth, so it's not the usual um, stuff. So I think it was the Helvetiaplatz, right near the Helvetiaplatz in Zurich. I was born, and my first years in my life, I was living in Zurich. And then we moved when I was 4 to 5 years old to Winterthur Seen, it was at this time. And I think with 5 or 6 years, we moved to my final place where I grew up, to Winterthur Stadt, so to the city of Winterthur. It was inner town near Feldheim and Tüss.
How old were you when you moved there?
Approximately 5 to 6
Okay.
years old. Yeah, so very young, yeah.
Okay. And how was the environment you grew up? How was that like? I'm thinking about the current topics. Were there a lot of migrants? How was the culture that you grew up with?
Yeah, so first, or my first things I can remember were very peaceful. We lived in Winterthur See, and it's a very nice quarter of the city in
Hmm.
Winterthur, in like an old farmer's house, which was really beautiful. It was not that big, but it's really beautiful. And I remember how I made fire there. I always like to make fires. Um, and when I moved to Winterthur Feldheim and Teuss in the inner city, it was a little bit of a different story. We moved to like a block. So a lot of people lived in this block. It was not the biggest, but it was not the smallest. It was just more city life. Before it was just more town life, with like pretty much 2 minutes into the beautiful forest, 2 minutes to the next fountain, stuff like that. And in the inner city, it was not really like that. And I think there my first contacts also with other cultures came, especially with a lot of Yugoslavian cultures, with the Turkish culture, with those peoples. And at the start it was really good. I like generally I grew up in a good terms with all those different cultures, but also I grew up with all those different. It's not only cultures, but it's also like rich and poor classes, right? So we had a lot of different classes in our part of the city because you know the deal. On the one side, rich people want to live in the cool neighborhoods, and the cool neighborhoods are mostly the a little bit sketchy ones, the inner city ones. But on the other side, you have like the poor people, or let's not say the poor people, just the underclasses, the working classes, the proletariat, which is a little bit more down to the ground, a little bit more, yeah, proletarian, I guess.
Mm.
And yeah, I think until the like end of primary school, I grew up pretty good. It was a good childhood. Had good friends through every culture. Um, was not that big of a difference. And to be honest, it was another time. I mean, I'm pretty young. I'm 25 years old right now, born at the start of the century, at the 2000s. But still, 10 to 15, even like 17 years ago, the city just was built different than it is today. So um, I had like a medium percentage of foreigners in my class. I think it was 50%. So it was already high, but it's not that high that it creates those problems which you can see today in those inner cities. But not to go too much into detail into that subject. I think it was something different, and different cultures. They were not I don't know, Somalians, Eritreans, North Africans. It was more like Turks. It was more like Albanians. It was more like Serbs. So still people which you could consider they technically can integrate, and they are not so different. Obviously, like Albanians and Turkish people, they're a little bit more different than, for example, Serbs or Croatians, but still they're not so different that living together is impossible. So out of that perspective, I had a very good upbringing. And like at the start, like at the end of primary school, I got a little rebellious. I got into the interesting cultures like graffiti culture, hip hop culture, the typical foreigner culture. Rap. One of my best friends from my childhood became a rapper.
And this
And
was like around 14, 15.
yeah, no, this was actually earlier. This was around like 12, 13, I think, something like that, 14.
So you came into touch with also other cultures and had the ability, or let's say the possibility, to taste it, how it felt, and it was
I
something
wouldn't
for
say
you.
it. I wouldn't say it like this. I think I got in touch with the other cultures way earlier, but this was a different kind of getting in touch, right?
Yeah.
So I think the ghetto culture and the destructive part of the foreigner culture, I noticed, or I came in touch with at the age of 11, 12, 13. The when you first start noticing, oh yeah, I like to do sports. Who am I? I'm a man. I want to be a man.
Exactly. All the
Um,
questions around identity arise, right?
yeah, exactly. When the questions in the puberty, I guess in English, yes, I think puberty starts. And then obviously the foreigners, just because out of the sheer numbers in our city, were more dominant, right?
Mm.
So we had a lot of really dominant rap cultures in our part of the city. We had dominant like graffiti cultures, the whole thing around hip hop really, and it interested me around this time, and I got really into it. I also started boxing, going to Muay Thai classes, and obviously every single boxing gym which you could find in my city was pretty much foreigner dominated. It's not even a bad thing. They box good. It was a good trainer in every single gym I was, except one which is heavily like rubbish by crime, by heavy crime and like shady stories. But still, it was an interesting experience. And like at that time, I was starting to change. I went to a private school because I was a pretty big problem kid, pretty much. Did some bad stuff, right? Like pretty much a lot of people in puberty are doing. Always try to find this cutting edge. How far can I really go? How far can I provocate? And I think that pulled through. That a rebellious side of mine until I was like 18, 19, 20. And yeah, obviously the aspect that my part of the city was not really the nicest. I mean, it was not the baddest. Don't like understand me falsely. It was not the baddest, but it was also not one of the nicest. And
Hmm.
it had those cultural influence, which were pretty bad. For example, the one friend that got into rap and stuff, he was pretty actually successful. Like made some really good clicks and made himself famous, in Switzerland, which is really funny. But he got into some really bad stuff because, as you all know, that hip hop, that foreign culture, is always in touch with crime, always in touch with like gangs, and in Winterthur, in my home city, with like a big problem with Albanian clans and stuff like that, because like The drug market is really big because we're near the border. So from Schaffhausen, it's like a city right at the border. It's only like 30 minutes away from our city. A lot of drugs get smuggled through there. May I say, like most of the cocaine gets smuggled through there and then gets over Winterthur to Zurich and in all of the big cities, which consume a lot of cocaine. Like St. Gallen, for example, I think has even like the world highest amount of cocaine in the water, which is pretty disastrous, funny, I guess. So yeah, I mean that pipeline in my quarter of the city hit pretty hard, also by me, but by my friends and stuff like that.
Okay, so let's maybe make a step back. So you would say that these whole events and what you have experienced there, and I agree to a certain degree when it comes to hip hop culture, which I think most of the young people in my school were somehow part of it. A little bit
Yeah,
more the foreigners, a little bit more than the Swiss kids that we had, because it brought something like this rebellious culture with it, of course, and of course there's this
yeah,
criminal element in it. And when you look back, like you have now mixed some of the topics, right, which are, I think, the everyday life of you in the politics. When it comes to criminality and all the happenings in that corner of Switzerland, would you say, like, in these times, I'm expecting something between 12 and 18, you would say your identity was like fixed, and you would say you have there made maybe some differentiations between them and me, and looked maybe to Switzerland and saw all the problems? When did that begin? Just to
yeah,
quickly to shortly address this.
yeah. Interesting question. I think my identity building was pretty, how should I say it, like had a lot of different sides. So when I started, I was like full on in this foreigner dominated hip hop culture because it was just like really the only one dominant thing which was cool and which was not like defendless, right? Because I always wanted to be part of something which could defend itself, which could stand for the points that you actually consider as valuable. And then I got more into sports. I think that was like one of the savers. I got a lot into sports. I knew like Indian guy actually. I won't say his name here. I don't want to get him in trouble, but anyway, Indian guy in my private school, and he was one of the only people which could actually like get a hold of me in this puberty age. And he was at this time doing the military, or he did the military in the Fallschirmaufklärer, I think, parachute division, right? So,
Yeah, I think so.
like special forces here in Switzerland, parachute division. And I always liked to do heavy boxing, kickboxing. I fought a lot. So he saw that, and it was like one very remarkable thing in my past. He said like, yeah, okay, I see, we did the bring Sally up, bring Sally down, like a push-up exercise. Everybody knows it, everybody hates it or loves it, and we did that, and they said after this exercise to me, hey man, I see you like that stuff. Don't you want to consider maybe going into the military? A parachutes division or a grenadier, so just special forces. I was like, yeah, I mean, actually, why not? Because I really like that stuff. And so yeah, with I think 14 or 15 years, I signed up for that process. And I think this was a turning point. And at that time, like 15 and 16 years old, I also finished private school, or like the private school for all the problematic kids, and went into another school. Maybe something I missed out, in my introduction. I think it's pretty important. I'm an artist. I technically come from the artist perspective. I always loved to draw, to paint, and just to create in that regards. And I always wanted to be, some sort of concept artist, or just an artist, really. That's why I started later studying scientific illustration, stuff like that. So at that time, I changed school from from the private school to public artistic school. It's called in Switzerland the Vorkurs, which pretty much means it's something that you have to do before you get into art school or into university. And I also wanted to do like the higher school, the high school, I guess. Um, but yeah, I never came to the high school because I tried to university without high school. Technically, that's not possible. But in some really rare cases, and luckily for me, I was one of those rare cases, I still got in because my portfolio, so my work was good enough, and they still wanted me, even though I had no higher school. But I skipped a lot, right? I keep getting off track right here.
No, it's
Mm,
interesting. It gives like a holistic picture about yourself, right?
yeah,
Let's skip forward and ask you this, right? Out of all these experiences that you had, and I think military is a really interesting one, and of course
yeah,
experiences in winter tour, etc. Like today, I would say you are quite standing for something. You call yourself identitarian,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
think there is the word of identity in it, right? And this is also
Correct.
something I referenced to when I ask you what shaped your identity. And let's get back to this question because where do you actually get your values of this identity from? What tells you like this is how you see yourself?
Hmm. So, in context of my history, or just ideologically in general?
It depends on you, right? How did you come through all this history? What shaped your values and which
Hmm.
events maybe changed them in the political scene?
Hmm. Hmm. I think from my growing up, just to conclude and maybe to get to the point really fast. I think the what's it called, Zusammenhalt, like the heart together that foreigners have, which I experienced very heavily in my youth, um, always has impressed me.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, the culture and everything that comes with it did not so much impress me, but just this feeling of together being of we are one nation, we are Turks, Albanians, or whatever. It always impressed me, and I think subconsciously from there on, I always asked myself, even when I was hard left, I was always at this time hard left winger, um, um, I subconsciously I always, ask myself, yeah, okay, but who am I? Because classically, my household, um, it's not to, paint my household bad, but we were just the classic Swiss people, no religion, no ideology, no doctrine, no conventions, pretty much nothing, right? Oh yeah, do whatever you like, do whatever what makes you happy. You know the drill, like in most Western liberal or left wing, I also was left wing households, was exactly this drill. So I always searched, and I remember 2015 when I had like a very, let's say, fluid identity. To get back to this very word, um, I was, searching, still searching. I was somehow left wing, obviously, but it was interesting what was happening at the world scale. Trump was at the peak of his primary Wahlkampf, at his fight for the presidency.
Mhm.
Excuse my
Of the election, yes.
rusty English. Yeah, exactly. At the peak of his election, I remember, don't liking it, but finding it interesting. And then when he got elected, I got into this fear also with like the big migration crisis. And I think actually, I have to quickly talk about this in terms of identity because that
Mhm.
was such a big and huge factor. Um, I was in art school in Zurich, like in this pre-art school, and I remember, watching the news of like millions over millions of Syrian refugees, so-called refugees, so migrants, pretty much flowing into Europe. And I think this was one of the first cracks in my left-wing ideology then. And I asked myself, yeah, okay. I mean, I guess fine, right? Because the refugees, they're searching for refugee can't be that bad, but why aren't they stopping in Poland, right? Or why aren't they stopping in Turkey or wherever, right?
Mhm.
And the Bataclan attack, so the Islamic State was also pretty heavy then, also other Islamic terrorist movements and Bataclan, Charlie Hebdo, those type of stuff were like not something that convinced me, otherwise, or of the right side, anti-Islamic, or just identitarian side. It was something that I had to think about, and I thought about, and I got into this then non-censored YouTube rabbit hole, and I remember watching Shlomo Finkelstein. It's a very famous YouTuber here in Germany. Um, he just got out of prison actually. Like in the last year, he got into prison because of completely stupid accusations, but that's no a whole lot of him. It was a big influence for me. So I started out of this first, I think, like stretch towards anti-Islamism, which I'm not anymore. Anti-Islamism to anti-left wingers, that classical anti-SJW. You surely know it, social justice warriors, 2015, those pink-haired crazy woman, and those, exactly the Jordan Peterson style. Quickly, I went into libertarianism, so it was pretty much a classical rabbit hole, right? Anti-Islamism, but still somehow liberal, left-wing. Then a little bit more liberal in an economic sense, then libertarian, then you watch Paul Joseph Watson, then you start watching other YouTubers. And I think for my identity, it was really important that I had this experience of the internet on the one side, of facts and statistics, of the logical side, and my personal experiences with exactly those, let's say, demographics, right? With exactly those which I read about in the statistic that they're overrepresented in that thing. And I could make a reality check, really, right? Because I knew those people, and I knew all of those different left-wingers would say socio-economical structures and stuff like that. And it made sense. It made a lot of sense, and it made almost so much sense at this time, 2018, 2017, that I went very far right. I went at this time very far right. I went into the alt-right pipeline. Richard Spencer, for example, at this time, the guy who throws his stupid hail victory and stuff like that when Trump was elected. I went into, I won't name the names because otherwise, tomorrow the press will write, did you know that Manuel watch this stupid stuff? So I went into this pipeline, also went into the old right. That's something different than the old right. It's a little bit of a language problem that we have here.
Old like not young.
Exactly, old like not young in Germany or in the German hemisphere, in the European hemisphere, and the alt-right, like alternative right in America. Those are two separate things, but they're both very radical. In the old right in Europe, it was more of NatSoc, so National Socialistic thing, because we have this history, and to this day, right, we feel the war, the Second World War. We have repercussions because of that, stuff like that. And in the alternative right in America, there was another story. It was more race-based. It was more like the Jewish question. It was the race question. 30% of people do 56% of crime type of very intense. And I went very far right. And I was still like in my puberty. I am still right a little bit in my puberty.
Almost finished, I would say.
Almost finished, but I think I'm still young
in my
puberty. Exactly. But then I was definitely in my puberty, so I always wanted to test at the borders. What can I say? How can I provocate? And at this time, I started studying. I think I started studying with 16. Or almost 17, exactly, almost 17, I started studying in the university, scientific illustration. And, I was pretty much swarmed by leftists because I was the only right-winger, hardcore right-winger, in the University of Arts in Zurich. And everybody who knows that place knows exactly how much of an Antifa, left-wing, gender thing that place is. It's crazy, right? So it's the exact opposite of what I was at that time. And I was not so offensive with it, or at least I thought I was not so offensive. I was always training at this time, because at the same time I was also doing the special forces in the military. And I had to train a lot. I was always like every single second I was like studying parachute physics, stuff like that, aerodynamics. I was studying the military stuff. I was training, and obviously this was a little bit strange for all the left wingers that thought, what's up with this guy? Always training so much, never, participating in our left wing talks. Rather, he's a little strange, and he so disciplined and white male. He's very young. He always has that Kubitschek, I don't have it right now, but the Toby always has the best one of it. You have to
I've
watch
seen that.
Toby's
Yeah.
the German, the German style of hair.
So is it correct to say by then you were not, or not anymore mainstream, you would say, right? You have touched on
No,
some points that I would like to elaborate on.
yeah,
So
sure.
one thing is, of course, being left, right? I didn't know that you were left wing, but
Hmm.
let's maybe dive a little bit deeper into this because you have made a certain development, and I want to know whether there are still some principles left from back then, because I
Yeah,
think the reason why someone is describing himself or ascribing himself some aspects is because he's sharing some viewpoints from there, right? And I would be
mhm,
interested, what was attractive for you on the left?
yeah.
And is
Um,
it still attractive, maybe?
yeah, it's a very good question. So, first point, what was attractive for me is the social aspect, and it still is attractive, and I would still consider myself to a certain extent um, a very, in English it sounds a little bit wrong, but a socialist, right? So the one thing I always liked was stuff like social services. I like helping people and being social to your community, right? Even though I didn't have that um, community definition which I have today of a nation, of its people, stuff like that. I didn't have that then, but it was attractive for me. And I think the other really attractive part, excuse me, a really attractive part was that connection with the foreigners. I think it's not really a left wing thing. I think it's more of a right wing thing, but still the left wingers have defended always the foreigners. So it was kind of part, of being leftist was accepting the ethnocentrism of migrants, which was very attractive for me because I love that ethnocentrism, right? And what was very what really pushed me away from leftism and always has pushed me away, or is never on that side of leftism, just to be very clear, was that gender stuff, the gender ideology, the yeah, you have to feel, and we're all so blah blah blah. This whole stuff, it never interested me. I was always hierarchical. I like the I like the concept of doing hard work and earning because you did hard work. I guess it's some to a certain extent libertarian, but at this time for me it was a very left wing thing because it's not based on I don't know if you're a foreigner or if you're a Swiss person. If you just work hard, you can get where you want. So it's that interesting symbiosis of or that connection between liberalism, American liberalism, and left wing egalitarianism. So that attracted me to the left, and I remember considering joining the Antifa because I liked boxing. I liked fighting, and thus I asked myself, what would be better than fighting with the political opposition? Luckily, I never joined. I never joined, and I never did that stupid stuff. Yeah, which I have imagined in my puberty. But yeah, that attracted me, and I think that's interesting because pretty much the same principles have like attracted me from the right. The right has rarely attracted me with I don't know free market capitalism. Obviously, I had like very quickly my capitalism phase, which I thought about it and stuff like that, but it was really never attractive. It never catched on to me, right?
Hmm.
What catched on to me was that underlying principle. I guess a little bit the mystic thing, that what is folk, what is community, who am I, right? That underlying thing, that interesting thing, which is not always scientifically, perfectly constructible. But yeah, I think those were the aspects that really captured me from the left side. Yeah,
I see. I see. So there's often like this description of left, or let's say you throw them all into a bin, and this you say this is left by in the understanding of the, let's say, Americans or the alt-right. Left mainly means what you just disliked in their view, right? It's always this gender things, and what else did you list? I mean, all those mainstream topics that are allowed to be discussed in the public sphere, right? But there's a
yeah,
little bit more to left, which you just told us, which is attractive for you. This collectivity
Yeah.
feeling among the people, right? And limited to a certain people, not for all, right? The solidarity goes as far as your nation or your people goes, correct?
Yeah, so that's exactly the thing, right? So the collectivist or the social aspect in left-wing hegemonies or in left-wing ideologies in today's hegemony, it's all, but it's not, right? Because it's a philosophical principle that you have to think very thoroughly about it to really get it. If solidarity is not has no border, has no limits, then everybody will have this so-called solidarity. And if everybody has it, nobody has it, because you literally can't distinguish from non-solidarity to solidarity, from non-social behavior to social behavior. You know, if everybody's different, we're all the same, and if we're all the same, everybody's different, right? Because those absolute terms, I would say those totalitarian terms in which the left really thinks, doesn't really depend if you're like hard left or light left. If you think it through, if you try to get to an end point of such an ideology, which such a leftist collectivist ideology, it's really not workable. It's deconstructing itself. You know, I know from a deep philosophical standpoint, everything is deconstructing itself if you analyze it too deep. Everything gets to a certain paradoxum. But this very leftist ideology gets very early into deconstructing itself and proving itself wrong. So what you just said is the distinction between left-wing collectivism and right-wing collectivism. Or I wouldn't say collectivism, I would say identitarianism. And that's one of the very important parts of it. Right-wing or generally the right accepts hierarchy, accept the oldest principle of nature, oldest principle of our world, of our religions, pretty much hierarchy. Because how can you make something work? You can make something work if you put everything in its right place. So you pretty much you sort it according to its hierarchy, yeah, its hierarchical place. Excuse my
Give an example,
English.
maybe.
Yeah. So if you want to, let's say, I don't know, build a car, you can't put a wheel on top of the car because then the car simply just won't drive. So for driving, the wheel is way more important than, I don't know, some other parts of the car, right? So this sounds really stupid, but it's really true. And if you think left-wing ideology or collectivism through, so equality for everyone, you know, solidarity for everyone, then it really makes no sense. Because if you give like an Central African as much solidarity as you would give me as much solidarity in a world without borders, right? I'm going to the extreme here. Um, Pretty much we would need the same system. We would pretty much need the same mechanisms. We would need the same people, the same culture. It would need to be everything the same, but it isn't, right? It isn't. And if you start doing that project, let's call it project, or that deadly experiment of egalitarianism and of solidarity for everyone, you will dissolve culture. You will dissolve every aspect of nations, every aspect of differentiations between the people. It pretty much will eliminate the diversity of people. And I'm going a little bit into other directions right now, but I think it's very important to understand that philosophical standpoint of everything is nothing and nothing is everything, right?
Yeah,
Because you can't differentiate.
let's dig deeper into this because there are some points I disagree and some that I really agree. It
Yeah,
sounds somehow like a product management thing, what you're explaining here. In the product management, it's very important how you set your priorities, right? And I'm thinking
exactly.
about this, right? We live in a world where dangers can happen and benefits can occur. And when dangers happen, right, I will first save my family, correct? So I will first save my
Correct.
children, maybe then my neighbors and the community, and like extend it until I reach the other people across the world, for example. You say the issue of this universal solidarity is that it treats everyone in a same level, and you say you want to build there a certain hierarchy. Do I understand that correctly? First of all,
I say the universal collectivism from the left treats every people as they would be the same, treats every people as they would have the same system.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's not possible for me, right? And you just, describe the hierarchy, a hierarchical process. You like your own family first. You treat your own family first. You save your own family first. Then maybe, other parts of your family. Then maybe your village. Then maybe your city. Then maybe your canton here in Switzerland. Then your nation. Then your continent. Then your folk. Um, that's a hierarchy.
Mhm.
And left wingers or that left wing collectivism dissolves, deconstructs exactly that important differentiation, that important hierarchy. They say, no, no, no. There are no nations. We're the same people. Deep down, we bleed red. All those stupid, stuff that they tell. They say, yes, you have to treat people which are from a completely different culture with completely different ethics and a moral system, right? You have to treat them the same as they would be your family, right? And that makes no sense. That makes no sense on an out of an evolutionary perspective. That makes no sense out of a philosophical perspective, out of a political perspective. It makes pretty much no sense. So I disagree with the left wing collectivism, which dissolves hierarchy. I
Mhm. Mhm.
agree
Yeah.
with uh, solidaric patriotism, with socialism from the right, which acknowledges hierarchy and works with the different kinds of people we have, right? And not only like around the world, like, I don't know, obviously I'm different from an African person, but also inside the nation, inside your family. If we talk about gender, it's an it's a similar story in family politics with the left. The left tries to dissolve and deconstruct family, not only hierarchies, but just really family structures. Man and woman. It's the base principle. It's the smallest entity of our nation, which needs to be strong. And they try to actively dissolve it. And while they dissolve it, they say, ah, yes, man and woman have to be totally equal, right? Um, but they're not equal. They're not equal, which doesn't mean that a woman is better. Excuse the English. It's like less worth than a
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
or like the opposite. But it means we have different places for different tasks.
Mm.
It begins in the brain. We have totally different brains, right? Which are made for totally different jobs. Our very biology, our very like from bones to our brain synapses, which are completely different. You can't make stuff the same, in which there is a big difference, even in the material, even in the very brain, right? So the left tries to deconstruct those naturally given, but also those philosophical hierarchies, which you can think about it. They try to deconstruct it in every part of their thinking, and that's what I disagree. This maybe just to give it a little bit of context for people who actually want to make a deep dive into left wing philosophical principles, because I think it's very important and it's very interesting. It originates pretty much from thinkers around the Frankfurt School, and today it's the Amadeo Antonio Stiftung. It serves a little bit of a different purpose, but they still act upon this philosophical fundament, which is not always the same, but which has like a clear line of deconstructing hierarchy, of devaluing pretty much everything which is valuable. But maybe we can go a little bit deeper into that
Yeah, definitely.
if you like. Yeah.
I'm agreeing to a very big part with what you're saying. I mean, there is like also in philosophy, right? This mind experiment where you, for example, have to save two people which are not the same, right? One is maybe, let's say, your relative, and the other one is someone else. Who will you prefer to save first, right? And there, this dichotomy between the ideal that one should have from a humanistic perspective is somehow disintegrated there, because again, I think what the left, or what you call the left, I wouldn't call them left. What you call the left, this liberalist left, right? What they
Mhm.
are somehow mixing up is that there's a certain ideal to which you can work towards, that all humans from their birth, or from their how do you say, from the value, from the Würde, right, are the same, that they
Mhm.
have the same potential, correct? But when it comes to everyday life, you primitively, or let's say naturally, as you say, you don't do this different, you don't do this the setting to equal both ideal and reality. So there comes a certain, I would even say, hypocrisy to the front that you see, and this is problematic. Where I disagree is, or let's say not disagree, but what I'm really interested in
Mhm.
is this limitation that you set for your nation, right? Or let's say for your ethnicity. Is
Mhm.
this a fixed limitation? Do you see that? Let's say you have helped all of your community, your collective, right? They're all
Mhm.
good now. Are you ready to help other ethnicities too, other nations too, or is it somehow like a competition that is going on between ethnicities?
So you have different standpoints. You have the objective standpoint, you have the subjective standpoint in this question. You have the geopolitical standpoint, and you have the like in the future the geopolitical standpoint, and you have the historical standpoint. So those are 4 points, which I'd like to summarize or do it very quickly so that I don't talk 2 hours about every one of them, which I could absolutely. So subjectively, I think I'll always prefer my own kind. I think that's just a natural thing. And when I say my own kind, I mean obviously my family, my village, and stuff like that. But out of a biological perspective and out of a historical, cultural perspective, it's pretty much what is Swiss, right, or what is North Italian, what is German, all of the ethnicities and nations I belong to, out of my genome, out of my culture. Out of an objective standpoint, as an identitarian, I say clearly, um, every nation and its people, its culture and its folk, have a right to prove themselves of their existence. So I won't attack somebody just because I don't know, I like the resources or stuff like that. And I'm not imperialistic in that sense on an objective scale. I wouldn't say like liberals do, live and let live, but I would say if you don't attack me, I will not strike you if there is no good Grund, what's called in English.
Reason.
Yeah, exactly. If there is no existential reason for me to defend myself and maybe then overtake you so that you don't attack me anymore, right? That's the objective standpoint. That's an ethno-pluralistic standpoint. If you want to take a deeper look at that, read Ethno-Pluralism by Martin Lichtmes. Very interesting book, very good book. I recommend it. And then we have the historical aspect. And the historical aspect, um, it's just a reality that it is always, to a certain extent, a competition. It's not always a competition around, I don't know, oil or around land or around that kind of stuff. It's very, those materialistic kind of things, and they were they are only relevant like for the last few hundreds of years, right? We had like before we had a lot of wars which cycled around religion, which cycled around ideology, which cycled around philosophy, stuff like that. So the non-material things, obviously, there's always a materialistic aspect in it. Don't understand me wrongly, but there's always a competition in those fields, and you have, at the minimum, to acknowledge that competition to live, um, to live peacefully. So me as a Swiss, as a at least culturally Swiss person, I have to say, out of our history, we were always prepared to take part as best as we can in this competition. They always called us and pretty much nation. How should I call it in English?
What did they say
Nation
in
of
Deutsch?
army men. And it's pretty much a nation of army men. So every man in Switzerland could defend themselves. Everyone was a soldat. Everyone was a member of army, right? Everyone had a rifle, so that we could live in peace, because we were a small nation which controlled very important aspects of geopolitical and of economic life, the Alpine region, right? And we survived with that mindset. So I have to say, always be prepared for the worst in a geopolitical sense. Be prepared for that competition, but also do not overestimate the competition. Do not go into war. Do not be philosophically, we would say, do not be too Faustian, too Nietzschean, and always try to strive for the next materialistic thing. I think keep it down to a certain extent. But this is a very Swiss perspective. And then we have the geopolitical perspective, the last perspective out of those perspective. So the one in the future, geopolitical one. I think out of the geopolitical one, we just have to see the reality of things. It's very hard, and my Swiss heart also doesn't like it to a certain extent, but we're getting overflooded with migrants, which is in direct correlation to big powers which do not have our best interests in mind. So we have to be very clear that we need a Europe which is aggressively strong, which pushes aggressively back against every agitation which goes against our own people and interests. And Switzerland is a part of it. Switzerland has to be a part of it. And I think geopolitically that Switzerland has to be a bigger part of it. I think if we had more economical, but also army technical, I guess, like connections with Austria, with North Italy, with South Germany, we could be a very strong nation within Europe that actually challenges the world powers. And I think that challenge of the world powers, we need it. We need it. It's not that I want it, or it's not that, yes, sir, challenge world powers, how cool. No, I think to live in peace amongst big powers like America, amongst big powers like Russia, like the BRICS states and stuff like that, you need to be a big power yourself. It's just the reality of things. We have a big centralization in the whole of politics. We have a centralization and a globalization in an economical sense, right? And it won't stop. Maybe we will have like a deglobalization because of migration, because of economical crisis, but the technical solutions, they will not go away. They will stay, and they will be centralized. And we will not have like a world with our small little nations like we did have in the Middle Ages, or like even in the Roman area, in the Scythian area, in the Greek area, Egyptian area, whichever area, we will not turn back to that. Like maybe there's like something which nukes us all, or I don't know, some sickness which pretty much lets our people perish. But if that's not the case, we'll not go back, and we'll have to educate accordingly.
I understand. I see a quite sophisticated view on sophisticated worldview. It's pretty much based on real politics, as far as I can understand, and that there's not, I would say, a fixed idea how ethno-states or nations like compete with each other, but it's there are different dimensions how they could compete, but they don't have to, right? Okay, you have a reference to Switzerland. What I'm interested in here is mostly this. What does it mean to be Swiss?
It means to make everything possible in your power at the worst situation for Switzerland. It means dying for Switzerland if that's necessary. It means staying in our culture, working for our culture, fighting for our culture with everything that you have at the baddest point of your life. So in German, I would say die totale Aufopferung für Kultur, Nation und Volk. I don't know how to spell it in English.
Maybe something like total sacrifice for your culture, people, and
what did you say? About die Bereitschaft für die totale Aufopferung.
Readiness for it, yes.
Exactly, the readiness for the total sacrifice for your own nation. If you're willing, if you're willing to bring this much to Switzerland, you can become a Swiss, but only if you're European. And that's a very important thing that we take into consideration here. You can only be Swiss if you are a European, because our culture, our nation, everything which represents Switzerland as you perceive and receive it is inherently European and Swiss. There was never a time, not once in history, where Switzerland has had influence out of non-European people. It simply doesn't exist. So this is just the base. And upon that base, You have to be ready to give the total sacrifice for Switzerland. Then you can become and be considered as a Swiss person. So far so clear. But obviously there are some, how should I say it? In Germany it would be Verläufe. It's like
Branches, maybe, depending on the context.
no, not really. It's like a field
Mhm.
where you can't really decide, okay, is this person Swiss or is this person not Swiss?
Okay.
So let me take a bold take here. I can't really say if you could become Swiss or not, right? Because as far as I know, you are Kurdish, right?
Right.
But you seem very white. So is it from a genetical, does a cultural standpoint possible to get, for example, like a lot of people from your nation to become Swiss? I couldn't tell because the Middle East is such a diversified place where you have everything from a European genetic structure to pretty much an African one. So I couldn't say. And the point that which I wanted to make is I'm not a totalitarian in that sense that I say it can never change, right? So if there is, I don't know, a tribe, a culture, a people which are technically non-European, but maybe from a genetical standpoint, they are near to us, or I mean, not the exact opposite. Maybe it's possible to become Swiss as a non-European. I don't know, right? I don't know everything, but I would say this is the great exception.
Okay.
And what I also want to say, just that the press doesn't like shoot me in some windows after this interview. And obviously, you can become culturally Swiss, but not fully, but culturally Swiss if you are integrating, if you're assimilating, if you bring that readiness to sacrifice as a black man. I don't know, as an Arabic man, as a Chinese person, you can become culturally Swiss. Yes, you can, but you're not fully Swiss. Always consider that.
People are often like conflating, like mixing up the let's say the ethnic identity, or let's say the ethnically being Swiss, right, with the, I think you call it the civic definition of being Swiss, right? So I can be a
Yes.
Swiss citizen, doesn't make me ethnically Swiss. And what you understand under Swissness is the ethnical part of it, as far as I can understand.
No, it's the mixture between it. So we have a civic part and we have an ethnical part. But in the civic part, we have also two aspects which I need to discuss in this theme. Obviously, if you want to be a Swiss, you need to be civically Swiss. You need to assimilate stuff like that, and you need to be an ethnic European, best case ethnic Swiss, right? But in that civic place. So there is like one side of the civic question, like civic nationalism. It's a big theme in America also, in a lot of Western countries, which I understand, especially like in America, if you're to be frightened, right? If you're a black person in America, which already is like hundreds of years in America, you're not part of the remigration. You simply will not be part of the remigration because you live there, because you're pretty much, you became part of the nation. If some people like that, or if some people don't like that, right?
So you would say the
So
black people are part of the American identity.
I would say the black people are part of Americans' history and have shaped, to a certain extent, its culture, even though America is based on an inherently European and white culture. It's very important to not confuse that. But they can't be deported. And also, I am not in favor, if they could be deported, I'm not in favor of such a deportation, obviously, out of moral reasons, but also out of every other reason. One of them, and very interesting persons in regard to that question, before we came back to the Swiss question, is Jared Taylor. So Jared Taylor is, people call him a white nationalist, blah, blah, blah. But he's one of the smartest persons I personally know in that area or in that field of work. And he has told me, you see, we are so different, or we are extremely different to a certain extent. And he doesn't think America can exist. Obviously, he can correct himself if I'm quoting him wrong, but America can exist in this type of coexisting, which right now is the case. And he's for this divide in America, that black people can have their own cities, neighborhoods, their own areas, and white people, right? Not because we hate each other, not because, all of the stuff leftists always say, just because there's a better coexisting, I guess, or a better existing within your own people, which does not mean that no black people, total racial, blah, 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 that doesn't mean it. But it just means that we have black cultures here and white culture here. Every culture has their, has their sense, has their belonging and their meaning. And maybe some black people live in the white culture because they're simply more fitted out of different reasons for the white culture. It does exist. And there we can come back to the Swiss question. It's important that we differentiate between a civic Swiss and like full Swiss, an ethno-cultural Swiss person. And the left has tried to deconstruct that civic nationalism, which has its place in the last 30 years or so, into an, in German I would say, Passbürgertum, Passschweizer, Pässli-Schweizer, that everybody which has the Swiss passport, which is a piece of paper, right, is now civically Swiss. No, that's not true. So don't confuse civic nationalism and the civic sense of being Swiss with the new school, the modern. Oh yes, if you have the Swiss passport, you're Swiss. No, those are two completely different things, because passports in Switzerland pretty much get.
So let me challenge something. Maybe you were speaking about the
Please.
readiness for the sacrifice for Switzerland, right? So in his
Please, yeah.
definition, a Swiss, an ethnic Swiss, also couldn't be actually seen as a Swiss if he's not ready for dying for his country, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's this
You see?
strong condition, right? It's not only being ethnically like born as a Swiss, but
No,
it's also a certain standpoint and worldview and maybe an ethical behavior that you expect from them.
yes. I don't think it's politics, but I think it's to a certain extent ethics, like you just said. And we are technically Swiss German, right? So we have a lot of German influence. We share cultural similarities, stuff like that. But there is one very important distinction between Germany and Switzerland to like really mark my point here. You can be German if you're not, or I would argue, Germans would probably argue against me, but you can be German, I think, also out of the historical context, if you're not ready to give total sacrifice. Maybe you're ready to give some sacrifice, but not total. But Switzerland has another history. Switzerland only exists because of that very total sacrifice. Switzerland is a nation of the will. America actually always looked up to Switzerland and looked back to Europe for its Declaration of Independence, for its ethics. Not that I say that today's American ethics and liberalist principles are Swiss ethics. No, absolutely not. But in tradition, right? In its European tradition, it's very similar. It's a nation of the will. Here in Switzerland, we have Italian parts, so Swiss, the Swiss part, Swiss-Italian part. We have a Swiss-French part. We have a Roman part. I always like and love to call it Roman part because it is a Roman part. We have like it's people in the mountains which talk a Roman language, an original Roman language. We have the biggest part, the Swiss German parts, and all of those parts, they form Switzerland as we know it today. I don't like the Romans, the French ones, I have to say honestly, but they're still part of Switzerland. And even though the Romans are more left-wing, they're more headed towards the French nation, they have that ethic, maybe not anymore so much, but they had at least that ethic that they are ready to sacrifice a lot, everything for Switzerland. And that's the differentiation between a nation of the will and maybe a nation of the blood, and the history like Germany. And I think that differentiation for me is very important.
So there's this aspect of will, a certain act of your mind, right? That you belong there. I see.
Yes.
I see. So something that is also in my interest is learning about more about the, let's say, not paradox, but maybe the conflict between collectivism and individualism. And as far as I have seen and experienced and read, the individualistic part is rather something of the right, correct? So it somehow promotes individualism and also profits or benefits out of it, of course. But on the left side, you have this very strong collectivist approach. How does it come that you say you're right wing and you follow something of a collectivism, and where has individualism its place there?
So, to be quite frankly, individualism is inherently left wing. But let me explain. Um, it's we have to ascend a little bit, uh, upon the left wing dichotomy. We have to go a little bit further. Um, we have to talk about liberalism. Liberalism really is the main question in today's society. And in liberalism, we have to talk about egalitarianism. So the belief that you are born pretty much as a blank slate, the blank slate theory. This theory dominates collective left-wing ideologies and also totalitarian ideologies like communism, for example, and like a lot of forms of communism, socialism, stuff like that. It dominates the liberal left. So it dominates the soft left. It dominates I also call it hippie left, what a wonderful world. Um, and it dominates the liberal right. But it does not dominate the identitarian right. And this is the main differentiation between the identitarian right and the left-wingers, but also the liberal conservatives, the liberal, I wouldn't call it right, but technically the liberal right. So individualism, where does it has or where has it placed in my personal Weltanschauung, worldview? As an identitarian, we value both. We value the collective, we value our nation, value our people, we value all the different layers of our identity, but we also value the individual. We always say an healthy and a good people is built upon its strong individuals. And that's a very important thing that one has to get. You cannot go into, I don't know, building a collective entity in any kinds of regards, economical, like society in a society, like doesn't really matter if you don't have a strong individual. If you are not, as a person itself, strong. So it sounds a little bit simple, but we have like a 50-50 thing. We know it needs a very strong individual, and that strong individual builds the strong collective. That strong collective benefits the strong individual, which the collective benefits even more because the individual is even stronger. So technically, in that simple thing, it's something that only has positive factors for each other.
Mhm. So you
That's
wouldn't
where the individual has place. Yeah.
you wouldn't say one is evaluated higher as the other?
The thing is, one can simply not exist without the other, right? So maybe yes, I have a hierarchy there, sure, especially if it comes to different political fields like economical fields or gesellschaftspolitisch, like societal political things, I guess in English. I have a hierarchy, but in this abstraction or in the simplicity of the question, I do not have it because a strong individual, you cannot be a strong individual without a collective. And you cannot have a strong collective without strong individuals. It's simply not possible. And you can actually look at it at a historical standpoint. Try to search any civilization which neglected one of those sides. Doesn't
Mhm.
exist, right?
Okay, I see. So categorically, there's not a per se differentiation, and also another evaluation of one against the other, right? Um, let's maybe it has something to do with this question because one big topic I would say from the alt right is, or I would say was, being anti-establishment. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I somehow, of the short information that I got from you, I also can sense something out of this topic. How do you approach establishment?
Well, I changed it because I don't like it. That's my approach. That would be the very short answer. Um, how do I approach establishment, or maybe the state? Do you mean also state with establishment? I guess, right?
I mean, everything that has some power centers, right? This can be state, this can be authorities, this can be media,
Good
correct?
answer. Yeah, good answer. Because
Corporations.
everything that is centered around human power, and I would actually say, just to offend the libertarians right at the beginning. I'm joking. Everything is a state which can organize people and the culture, and comes out of the people and its culture. It's very important to get in the right direction, right? Um, so how do I go about it? Well, I see that it needs some kind of organization um, for our nation, for our people, and for our culture. And I'm a strong defender and supporter of the concept state, and also of a certain kind of democracy. It's not the same, for sure, not the same democracy as liberals or egalitarians would call it, but it's a democratical sense of having Pflichten auf English.
Duties.
Yes, having duties and receiving benefits through a higher power, which is organically created out and through our culture, pretty much. So I'm a supporter of the state. I dislike the current state, obviously, not to confuse it. I dislike the current state. I do not only dislike the people in it, I only dislike structures out of that state. I dislike a lot of structures. I dislike how the states within those structures and those people agitates in our society, for sure. But I don't want to deconstruct that state. I want to I want to criticize it, or I mean, what is I want? I do it, right? I shift power structures in the very fundament, in the very basis of this state. So in the people, in the youth, I shift the hegemony to pretty much rebuild the state from within itself. Because it sounds very simple, but it really is the most important thing. The next generation, the next few generations, they will operate within this exact state, if we dislike it or if we like it. And if we want to have like a change, we need to get to a hegemonical change in that demographical youth, right? So that's what in the short terms, that's what I think, and that's what I do with the establishment, right?
I
Obviously,
couldn't
there's yeah, please.
I couldn't quite get like you have power a problem with central or centralized power.
I have a problem with globalized centralized power. I have a problem to a certain extent in economical sense with centralized power, which destroy regional factors, regional Unternehmen, what's it called, like companies.
Companies or
Yeah,
manufacturers, yeah, I see.
regional companies. I have a problem with an übernational and an overnational and globalized centralization, which destroys the sovereignties of nation states, which need to be sovereign and which need to agitate on itself. That doesn't mean that we can't take any um, economical connections with or benefits with other nations. No, obviously we can, but I think the centralization and also to a certain extent the free market needs to be limited in favor of the people, and that's the very strong differentiation between liberal conservatives, so the liberal right, and the identitarian right. The liberal right says the market will rule and was heißt regeln?
Yeah, regulate itself.
It will regulate itself,
The
right? And
invisible
I say
hand. Yeah.
no. the market will only work for itself and overthrow people and borders. Because the biggest enemy of the market and of profit, which means market, are nation states, are borders, are cultures. Because obviously a customer without nations, without borders, even without like cultural identity, will buy everything way more than someone who is Swiss, who has a Swiss culture, who is like anchored in that in his city, in his town, because he values that city, his town, his nation. He will not buy stuff from China or from America or from Africa as much as that other customer, which has no connection with his nation, with his culture, and with stuff like that, right? So if the market really regulates itself, it deregulates out of existence, right? And I would say I draw the line there where the sovereignty, in regards to Switzerland, the sovereignty of the different cantons and regions will be overthrown, right? So I want that Zurich, I want that Bern, I want that Aargau to a certain extent, have its own, market. I also want to have like small markets, like the butcher in the town, stuff like that. I want to have that regional factor because that regional factor secures us the sovereign aspect in our whole nation.
Mhm.
And I would actually regulate the market there where it starts to destroy small companies and centralize everything. For example, in Switzerland, just to give one concrete example to be more understandable, I don't like the centralization of the farmers' economy in Switzerland. For example, in Thurgau, in the canton of Thurgau, where pretty much in a few years, most of the small farms get bought from most of like really big companies. Then they start importing like East Europeans, if you can call it, then a lot of gypsies and stuff like that. They import like people which work for pretty much nothing, which completely destroys Swiss loans and our own economy, which makes us dependent upon these nations and pushes Swiss people out of that economy and pretty much destroys or deconstructs our society. And that really is the market. Those are not left wingers which do that. No, no, no. Those are mostly liberal conservatives out of so-called right-wing parties, which completely destroy our economy.
So you're against like global regulation of that, but to my ears it sounds something. I would sorry for the words, like when a Marxist is speaking about the last equilibrium where everyone is like having the benefits of the economy. In this case, like you're somehow limiting it to the nation and hoping that when you're interacting with other nations in economic senses, that you will receive the best benefit out of this, right? Isn't this kind of utopian perspective that you have?
Götz Kubitschek, he's the what's it called in English? Buchverleger, book.
Publisher.
Yeah, exactly. Publisher of one of the most important identitarian book stores, I guess, on Pius Verlag. He said one of the biggest weaknesses and one of the biggest strengths that the identitarian right wing has in Europe is that we have no utopia. We have no utopia because a utopia builds man or breaks man into a direction which he is not. And I wouldn't say I have an utopia, but I have an ideal direction. And I'm absolutely 100% sure. And I'm also not extreme in that economic beliefs. That's why, for example, in our action group, Junge Tat, there is no, I don't care if you're like a little bit more social or a little bit more on the libertarian side. The only thing that I care is, do you want to preserve our people, our homeland, and our culture, right? And I'm flexible in this thought because I think it changes all the time. And I'm absolutely 100% sure that the thing that I formulated, with trying not to get too centralized in the different cantons, trying not to get too centralized in the Swiss nation. Maybe at a certain point, maybe we're in a war again. Then we need a very centralized economy, and we can't really do anything about it, because if we don't do it, we're probably going to perish from the face of earth, right? So it's not a fixed thing that I concentrate myself on and nothing left or right from what I just said, right? It's just something that I think would be beneficial for Switzerland. If that's possible, we'll see. It's not like Marx, for example, which says the worker must free itself from the strains of the bourgeois because of factor XYZ, because of this and because of that. And if you don't do that, absolutely total death and punishment and whatever. So it's a totalitarian way of thinking, right? I'm not like this, yeah. The only place where I'm really very, I wouldn't say totalitarian because it's not fitting, but strict, is when it comes to the existence of our people, right?
I see. So there's this overarching vision that you're all steering towards, and you say there are like different means that you can use for it, right? And one means is of course this, and the ideal state of economics that would somehow preserve the or the interests of your people in this whole constellation, in this complex global world.
Right now, it's a question of time. Right now,
yeah, I see. Good. Another question I want to ask you here is to take maybe another side, right? And I think we're through with the most big topics, but to have some thought experiments on it, right? Is there, if you make this like very self-reflective, is there something where you say that for your political opponents, or the ones that are like not with you on one line when it comes to political issues, is there some topic you would acknowledge the correctness of the other side, maybe of a conservative left, or maybe less left liberalists, but maybe left conservatists?
I talked about this subject yesterday when I also had an interview, and they asked me a similar question, and I would say, yes, they are right. Obviously, in some fields, and I think let's quickly make it from a different perspective, because then it's more understandable. So, if you zoom out of the political perspective and you analyze the psychological reasons behind politics, and you take a look at the liberal, but also the authoritarian and the totalitarian left. And you have one overarching theme. Social, pretty much the social aspect. So everyone wants to have the best life for anyone, right? For pretty much everyone. And out of a European perspective, out of an evolutionary perspective, I have to acknowledge that is a very European thing to do. Because we Europeans evolutionarily tend to be more social. So they are in the right psychologically that we as Europeans need to be social and just are social, and just are more social than other nations and other peoples, which is not a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing, right? It's an objective thing. And if we zoom in now a little, we have, for example, people always say, Manuel, you're so left-wing in your economic politics, right? I say, yeah. It seems like I'm left-wing, but it's like on the outside, it looks extremely similar, to similar. But why? The reason why I think like this is the exact opposite of the left. So, for example, I always give the example of nurses. I want that nurses and general Pflegepersonal, care personnel, I guess, should get paid more. The left says exactly this exact thing, yeah? I'm talking about liberal left, I'm talking about like an authoritarian left, I'm just talking about the left because it really is so simple. They say exactly this thing. And obviously if you come from the outside, like, oh yeah, Manuel is left wing, it makes sense, right? And I say, yeah, but the reason why I want that the nurses become more money, more loan, right? Than they get now in Switzerland, or pretty much I think in every European nation, is not the same. It's because I think the duty, their job, what they're doing is not material or economically important. It is so important for our society. It has a higher duty. Their duty is over the material layer, right? The left wing, on the other side, they are Marxists mostly, or they come out of a Marxist dialectic, so they see everything in a material sense. They try to balance the material. They see one man has the what's it called, the value of a certain material sense, and they say, okay, the nurse needs to get more money because she is economically, I wouldn't say the same, but she is nearer to the doctor because we don't like capitalism and the doctor earns too much money. And because the left and the Marxists are egalitarian, they say those two people are pretty much inherently the same, so why not earn the same? It's a simplification of things, but the distinction between those two worldviews are the left thinks materialistic. I, as an identitarian, think in non-materialistic terms. I think in a identitarian term. I think in the people's term, right? So there's something above the material, above the economical sense of valuing things.
I see. So maybe I wouldn't agree with everything you said, every word you said, and I think I will have a lot of other guests here speaking maybe against that. But just to make a personal note here, you were saying something about how did you call it, a socialist view on humans. Think about Buddhism, right? We have a very ethical approach to humans and community. We could disagree maybe on this one, that it's a typical European thing, but this for
Oh, we
another
can
time.
debate.
For another time, definitely. But what I wanna ask you as a last question, we have spoken a lot about how you would like to change Switzerland or Europe as a whole, and I mean this is the most prominent stuff you guys are saying from the Junge Tat, remigration and other things that you have now also explained in more depth here. How would your ideal Europe, ideal Switzerland look like?
Mhm. Interesting question. By the way, did you know that Buddhism is an Indo-Aryan thinking?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Okay. I won't talk about it anymore. Okay, how do we want to shape Switzerland, Europe? So to get basic again, or to get important again, right? Uh, the base of Europe, the base of the whole Western civilization is in great danger. We get replaced day to day, even heavier. It's like pretty much going exponentially fast, the replacement migration. So our first priority in changing anything in any field is remigration. And without any discourse and yes, here a compromise and there a compromise. No, our people are not up for sale, are not up for politics. Our people have a right to its existence, like any other people in the world. That's what we want to change first and foremost. Remigration is not only deportation, because the first thing that the political opposition will say is, you see, Manuel wants mass deportations. He wants to throw all the XYZ in blah, 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 whatever, right? Remigration is a solution which is allumfassend, which is
All encompassing, yeah.
Yeah, all-encompassing for the whole migration theme. It's not only deport illegals and criminals, obviously it's also that, right? Because that's the very fundamental of the state and how a nation works. But it's also like turning around the push and pull factors. Like, for example, push factor, which pushes migrants out of their nations, would be a war, right? Would be propaganda from the West that they can have everything here. And the pull factor is, for example, some labor which gets paid very poorly out of a European perspective, but out of an African perspective, it's like huge amounts of money. So that's a pull perspective, and we want to turn them around, right? We want to give them an opportunity. We want to give them a perspective in their own nations, which pretty much is a push away factor from our nation, and we want to have, let's say, factors which, excuse my English, factors which which makes our nation pretty much non-attractive or harder to get in, right, to assimilate to migrants. For example, what would that mean? The whole process of asylum. We would just, make ein Auslagern des Asylverfahrens. How could I say?
I mean, exporting the processes to other places, right?
Exactly, exporting the processes into other places so that the people don't have to go around the globus, and in the meantime endanger their life, further criminal entities in every field of pretty much migration, the one who gets those shitty boats which come across the sea, the one who takes the shady tickets with a huge profit margin, the one who transports people over the Swiss-Italian border in like disastrous circumstances. Those are criminals, right? And we don't want to further those criminals, and we also don't want to see people in those circumstances. So we would pretty much get the whole process of asylum into or nearer to their migration or to their homelands. Remigration also means that we, now, when we come to the scientific terms, it gets very hard with my English, but wir müssen das Asylgesetz revidieren.
We have to revise
change
the asylum politics.
Is revise? Oh, yeah, you see, thank you. We have to revise the asylum politics pretty much, but also especially the test, to get to or to become a Swiss. We have to make it harder, and we have to make it longer. We have to make it more intense. We have to really test them if they're willing to sacrifice, to take sacrifices for the Swiss nation. It's all part of remigration.
You're now elaborating on the term remigration, but I was asking about your optimal world in Switzerland.
Okay.
So it sounds like your optimal world is only busy with remigration. So maybe give me a picture how it would look like after this remigration was successful.
Okay. Yeah. It would look like.
Do you still have migrants in Switzerland or in Europe?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I think we would have migrants, but only like a small amount, which is better for the migrants and which is better for us, which makes more sense in every aspect of life. I think for me, an ideal Europe, I have a lot of perspectives, which I'm not going to elaborate so much, but I think the ideal Switzerland would be a Switzerland where Swiss people, after remigration, can finally, think about higher stuff, think about nice stuff. I'm an artist, right? So the best Switzerland for me would be a Switzerland where I can paint in my room without thinking about the great replacement, without, thinking about what the fuck is politics doing again, right? Without thinking about that our towns and city squares get dirtier and get uglier with every piece of architectural thing, from those neo-modern, from those leftist people. So I think the ideal Switzerland would be a Switzerland which can build itself out from its inner values. I don't know what this will be. To be honest, I don't know what this will be. I don't have the perfect vision. Obviously I can say I would like to see Austria, Switzerland, South Germany, North Italy, the whole Alpine region, united as the strongest nation and stuff like that. But that really is just LARP, it's just something that you can talk about as if it would be, I don't know, a board game or something like that. But I think the ideal nation, and my view for Europe, for the whole of Europe and for Switzerland, is pretty much the Möglichkeit, the opportunity to build something out of itself without having strains from globalists, without having strains from the replacement migration, which pretty much destroys your nation. And I think we will see it by nicer cities, nicer architectures, like a strong university, good academics, like a philosophical revival of the West, right? Because what really comes out of the West today, philosophically, but also civilizationally, is bullshit. It's straight up bullshit. It's a continuity of the Frankfurt School, a continuity of thinkers which are not even European, right? So I think that diversity of thinking, that beautiful strength, that beautiful sense of architecture, of yes, of living, of morals, of working, this will be my ideal Europe. And I think this is only possible through remigration.
Still a follow-up question, although I promise it will be the last question, which is currently maybe very actual, current. Who do you blame for mass migrations? I'm thinking about the current situation in the Middle East, for example.
Yeah, obviously, I know what you want to hear. Well, there's an objective answer. The objective answer is I blame lobbyists, I blame politicians, I blame NGOs, I blame interest groups, I blame financial institutions, which all have interests, either ideological or economical interests, in replacing Europe. Right? That would be this. That would be like a really easy answer. And the bigger answer goes into the direction of like, I think we need to stop. We need to stop allowing thinking ways. We need to stop allowing. You can't really call them, but philosophies which are inherently anti-European. I think we need to stop this guilt trip, which pretty much is there in the whole West. No, we're not the people which are guilty for every single thing which happened in the past. Yes, we had slavery. Yes, the European Westerners, they had slaves. Yeah, they truly did. But so had every other big nation which existed in the whole of humanity. And like the ones who ended slavery, first of all, were Europeans. The ones who had the biggest amount of slavery were Arabs, right? So there's not even white people there. We need to end the guilt trips, win the wars. Yes, obviously the Second World War was disastrous. A lot of really bad things happened there. But the system with the most deaths, like exponentially the most deaths, which was communism and all its forms, right, was not even European. It was mostly non-European. Also, communism in Russia was pretty much non-European, was mostly from a Middle Eastern strain of thinking. Same with China and those areas. So I think this guilt trip, which is undermined by anti-white philosophical rhetoric and schools, those are pretty much one of the biggest reasons why we today in Europe pretty much get replaced and are in that situation in what we are, right?
Not sure whether I would say right, but thank you for your elaboration, and hope to see you again. Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the interview. Looking forward to it.